Welcome to this episode of ACG's Growth TV. I'm Catherine Mulligan with Middle Market Growth Magazine. Today's episode is brought to you by Grant Thornton LLP, the U.S. member firm of Grant Thornton International Limited, one of the world's leading organizations of independent audit, tax, and advisory firms. I'm joined by two senior leaders from Grant Thornton to talk about how the current lending environment is impacting private equity and their portfolio companies, and how investors are managing debt for their portfolios. To discuss those topics, I'm joined by Carlos Ferreira, the National Managing Partner of Private Equity Services at Grant Thornton, and Paul Melville, Grant Thornton's National Managing Principal of Corporate Finance. Thank you both for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So at the start of the pandemic, there was a lot of concern about the extent of the impact on businesses and about whether there would be sufficient liquidity for companies to get through the crisis. From where we sit today, almost 6 months later, how would you assess business performance and the health of the debt markets? Let's go to you first, Carlos.
Yeah, thank you, Katie. And I agree. I think, particularly portfolio companies of private equity firms who had fiscal year ends of December and were closing out their year-end financials and reporting to their lending lenders. They were just going into the end of Q1 when things and business was being shut down. And so there was a lot of turmoil going on in their operations as they were trying to close out their financial statements. Many conversations around potentially going concern when there was just so much uncertainty as you think about how things stood back on March 30th. Since then, though, I think everyone expected the worst, but things have certainly improved with the stimulus package being made available, performance and businesses opening back up again, the agility of many of these middle market companies to be able to adjust to the work environment that we were all placed in. And I would say there's certainly been an improved sense of optimism as results and business has been, don't want to say getting back to normal, but certainly a lot more optimistic than, say, at the end of the first quarter. Mm-hmm. We certainly have a number of businesses that are struggling and businesses that are in very specific industries, such as restaurants and hospitality, travel and leisure, that are still not getting the consumers that are returning to their business. And, they may not be as optimistic as many of the other businesses that are maybe being able to adjust to this new environment.
Mm-hmm. Paul, do you want to weigh in there too?
Yeah, I think Carlos covered a couple of the points, but I think that the liquidity piece is really interesting because I think if you go back to the March timeframe, there was a lot of concerns, as Carlos just said, about liquidity. I think that the stimulus bill definitely was a real help. Without the stimulus bill and the liquidity that injected into the system, then no doubt we will be having a completely different conversation than we're having today. Mm-hmm. It really has saved a lot of businesses. It's also enabled more cash into the system, so consumers are a little bit more confident than they would have been otherwise. Mm-hmm. I don't think we're out of the problem by any stretch yet. I think that, as Carlos alluded to there, what we've called the people-to-people businesses are the ones that really struggle. Mm-hmm. And the summer in some ways has been great, particularly with restaurants, a little bit of outdoor dining, but you worry about what might happen come the winter if we're not see any significant progress, and how do those businesses help. So I think there's a little sign of optimism, but there's just so much uncertainty, Katie, around at the moment that no one can predict how it's going to play out. And I think that uncertainty does create some challenges for everybody, really. But it also creates opportunities. We've seen some people coming into the market and buying businesses and potentially making real strides to improve their businesses, really. So I think there are opportunities around, but there are certainly a lot of challenges at the moment.
Mm-hmm. And Carlos, you noted the business impact of COVID wasn't as severe as was first expected, but have you seen the disruption affect middle market borrowers' ability to meet their loan obligations?
Yeah, absolutely. When you go through a significant disruption in your business like we did, where you literally had to shut down for as long as 6, 7, 8 weeks, I don't think there is any debt covenant out there that was designed to, withstand that kind of a disruption to the business. So despite the fact that, yes, there may have been a lot of room in liquidity, there may have been a lot of room in their covenants, many organizations we're struggling to either meet their existing debt covenants or pay their existing loan payments at that time. I think what is interesting though is, and what's different than the financial crisis, is that there is much more liquidity in the lending community today than there was, for example, in the financial crisis. And so lenders have been accommodating, being able to make adjustments, defer some payments, agree to, extension of terms. And that, I think, has helped. And as we come out and get back into operation, it really comes down to their ability to continue long-term in terms of meeting their obligations under their loan agreements.
Mm-hmm. And what are some of the considerations that private equity firms and their portfolio companies should keep in mind as they work with lenders to modify their existing debt?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, what we hear from the lending community and from our private equity clients is that to communicate early with their lenders, really, to get in front of it, make sure you're talking about potential shortfalls early on, and really viewing your lender as a partner, as opposed to, keeping them in the dark and surprising them at the last minute with potential late payments. Second thing is, I mentioned before that there is significant liquidity available in the credit markets, and so the lenders are able and willing to work with good, sound businesses to meet their near-term liquidity needs. With that said, those amendments and modifications to the payment terms or to the agreements need to be carefully analyzed, because the IRS does have fairly bright lines around significant modifications as defined by the IRS. And some of these modifications may cause possibly non-cash taxable income. And so things like changes in interest rates or deferment of payments could ultimately result in a modification. Some of the more common modifications during these financial hardships are extensions of maturity dates or payment holidays, changes of interest rates. And we were also seeing conversion of cash interest to PIK. Changing of covenant terms. Those are all items that really need to be evaluated in the context of the IRS's definition of a significant modification to ensure that there isn't an inadvertent tax consequence that's created. And, this would be at the worst time when you're struggling to have liquidity to create a non-cash income item that's going to result in potentially tax payments.
Mm-hmm. And one likely consequence of the COVID crisis will be that private equity firms postpone their exit plans, which could mean they'll take longer to return capital to investors. Paul, do you expect to see firms turn to low-cost debt as a way to put money in the hands of LPs?
Yeah, I think we've seen it before, where the private equity have got to return capital to their investors. That's the reason they're there. Historically, it's been through sale of the business, and we've had a great run of unbelievable multiples and great returns. At the moment, you have a lot of uncertainty around value. Nobody likes that. And so I think one of the options potentially that we're going to see is dividend recaps. Interest rates are pretty low. Balance sheets should have been relatively strong, and maybe hopefully they won't have been diminished too much by the last few months. And that does allow some ability to think about dividend recap. And get some cash out there to their investors. I think the other thing that plays into that, Katie, as well, particularly at the moment, is we're right in the middle of the various political congresses at the moment, or conventions. So, at this point in time, there's always some uncertainty about what's going to happen to the tax rate. And so, there's a view as well that maybe that allows you to do almost the dividend recap is a synthetic sale at the moment, allows you to get money out in potentially what could be a lower tax rate than if the political environment changes post-November, really. So there's a couple of different things at play there. I think that most private equity companies should be thinking about what the options are to drive cash out of their business, given you've got a low interest environment and you've got a potential election year with maybe a change in the governing party. So there's a couple of things I think that play out there that they would be very wise to think through that. And certainly from our interactions with the lenders and the P funds, that's something that they're thinking about. And that's going to ramp up, I think, pretty quickly over the next month or so.
Well, we'll leave it there. Carlos and Paul, thanks for joining me today on ACG's Growth TV.
Thank you.
Thanks, Katie.